Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our first Leadership Alliance Virtual Professional Development Series Wednesday workshop for summer 2025. My name is Dr. Jane Indorf, and I'm the manager of undergraduate and graduate programs with the Leadership Alliance. I'll be moderating today's session on discovering careers in research. We had almost 90 questions when I checked about an hour ago, submitted ahead of time by our VPD students. And for those of you who are tuning in live today, you can use the Q&A box to ask questions during today's session. We won't be able to get through all of the questions today in the hour that we have, but we'll do our best to address most of the topics that were brought up. Research is a part of many different career pathways, and those who obtain a PhD now have lots of career options to pursue beyond academia and the traditional faculty route. However, up-and-coming researchers like yourselves may not be fully aware of the diversity of careers that are available to those who obtain a PhD. Additionally, it's not always clear how getting a PhD will help you into those non-academic careers and make you a competitive job candidate. During this session, we'll be hearing from 4 professionals who went to graduate school and got PhDs, but are now in non-academic positions. Before we jump into our panel discussion, I'll briefly introduce each of our guests. Today, we're joined by Dr. Christopher Doss, who's a senior policy researcher and economist of education at RAND. He specializes in fielding causal studies of education interventions and policies. Dr. Doss has a PhD in economics of education from Stanford University. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Charisma Edwards, who holds a PhD in electrical engineering from Louisiana State University. Dr. Edwards currently works at Microsoft as an account technology strategist for K-12 and higher education institutions. In this position, Dr. Edwards guides educational leaders through realizing their institutional strategic priorities using technology solutions. We're also joined today by Dr. Constantine Khripin, who is a lead scientist at Cabot Corporation. His work focuses on developing novel, sustainable nanoparticle reinforcing fillers for tire rubber. Dr. Khripin has a PhD in chemical engineering from Lehigh University. And finally, I'd like to introduce Dr. Andrea Shergalis, who is a discovery scientist on the protein degradation platform team at AbbVie Pharmaceuticals. Her responsibilities include cell-based assay development to understand the mechanics of E3 ligase-directed protein degradation. Dr. Shergalis has a PhD from the University of Michigan in medicinal chemistry. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. So to get things started, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give a little more detail on their background, their career pathway, what it's like in their current position, what they do, and how research and the transferable skills that they learned as a researcher are part of what they do. So Dr. Doss, I'll ask you to get us started, please. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks everybody for coming. Like Jane said, my name is Chris Doss. I'm an economist of education and senior policy researcher at RAND. For those of you who don't know, RAND is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research organization. We're also called a think tank. And as an economist of education, what I try to do is understand effects of interventions and policies on students and teachers and outcomes for them that we think we care about. The goal is to go beyond correlations into causation. So that means fielding, and designing randomized control trials when you can, and then using statistics to try to get an answer to an RCT as possible when you can't do the randomized control trial. I kind of talk about my position as a quasi-academic position. So everything I kind of learned and did in grad school is almost directly comparable to what I do here. It's just not in a university setting. And it differs a little bit from a university setting in that we do kind of more traditional academic work, but we also do a lot more client-facing work. So things that wouldn't typically be published in academic journals kind of straddle both worlds. I kind of took a circuitous route to education research. I was a chemistry major in college. First, I did organic chemistry, and then towards the end of my undergrad, I was gravitating towards physical chemistry. And for most of my undergrad years, I did research for professors either during the school year and during the summers, and the Leadership Alliance helped me find some of those kind of summer research opportunities. But towards the end of undergrad, I decided I kind of knew I didn't want to do a PhD, at least in chemistry. I kind of found the lab a bit isolating for my tastes, and I also had an interest in K-12 education and teaching. So I started teaching high school first in a private school because it's actually easier to get a job there. You don't need certification. And after doing that for a couple of years, I liked it. So I went for my master's in education. And it was there that I kind of got exposed to the education policy world. I was also exposed to kind of economics and as a way of analyzing policies and interventions. And so kind of combined my interest in both education and the scientific process. And so I taught in the classroom for a bit after my master's, but decided that I wanted to go into research. And so got my PhD, went back to school, got my PhD, and have been working at Rand ever since, which has been about 8 years now. I think Jane also asked us to talk a little bit about challenges. So in terms of challenges, kind of for me, the biggest challenge was kind of these kind of leaps of faith. So I came from an immigrant background, the stuff that we were kind of looking at were like medicine, business, law, kind of the things, typical things that immigrant parents want you to do. So to say that I was going to teach was a little bit of a leap of faith. And then, I didn't, like I said before, I didn't realize econ or this field even existed. So kind of deciding at 31 to try a PhD program, and it was a little bit of a leap of faith. So it was kind of a mid-career shift and everything that kind of goes with that. But I'm thankful I made those decisions.
Dr. Edwards?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Kind of like Dr. Doss, I started, well, I wasn't in, well, I'm sorry. I started in electrical engineering in undergrad or engineering in undergrad in a program that was focused on, producing more doctorates and more professors. And so hoping that I would go into the professorship. And I bought into that, actually. I really wanted to be, I did read summer research every year, and that's how I got involved in Leadership Alliance, but did summer research every year. And then with the intent that I was going to go to graduate school and get a PhD in electrical engineering. I did everything I said I was going to do. And I actually did everything I said I was going to do. Because somewhere in undergrad, I said, oh, maybe it would be great to go work in industry in order to be a better professor. But somewhere along the road, by the time I got through my PhD process, I realized that I really love academia and I hate corporate America. And I really was actually planning to go be a professor. Like I am, and down to the school. I had chosen the school. I was really interested, very much so like Dr. Doss. I actually got into was very excited and very interested in engineering education or STEM education towards the end of my academic career, but I was too far along in automatic. Basically, I did automatic classification of signals. So what's now machine learning. And so I was doing that, but I really got into outreach and STEM education towards the end. And so I wanted to go to a teaching school. And so in engineering, there are not a whole lot of teaching schools. So I found a happy medium. I was going to come back home to my hometown of Houston, Texas, and be a professor at Prairie View A&M University. It's an HBCU right outside in the Houston area. And I had spoken to the dean and the provost. They were just waiting on my teaching statement and research statement, and I would have been a professor. Somewhere in that time, however, during that time, I attended a Society of Women in Engineering conference, and we had to upload our resumes to that. And even at that conference, I was in the academic portion, doing all the things for academics, and still not trying to go to corporate America. But in that process, someone reached out to me about a career at Microsoft or coming to Microsoft. And circle back to what I said I was going to do in undergrad. Oh, by the way, you said you wanted to be, you wanted to work in industry in order to get to be a better professor. So I figured, hey, Microsoft is a great place to work. It might be it can't be that bad. Maybe I'll try out Microsoft and go work for Microsoft. I came in through a college hires program, which was, I came in through a college hires program. They didn't know what to do with me. Obviously, they normally don't have PhDs coming in. And I started as a consultant, but then I did some program management or what have you, and then moved around the company to finally land in my current position as a technology strategist for academics. And so it was for education, academic medical centers, as well as K-12 and higher education. So the research portion. So my background is very, very helpful and in alignment with where I am right now. It's, obviously being having a PhD and introducing myself. I never called myself doctor until I got into this role, because it obviously became important to the people that I speak with every day. And I think that was about it. I think it was a challenge. I think I had a challenge when Dr. Doss was talking, and I forgot about it because I was so engaged in what he was saying. So it'll probably come back to me. I'll put it in the chat, or someone else will say something that reminds me, and I'll speak up. But thank you for having me.
Dr. Khripin.
Thank you for giving me this chance to talk about my career. Right now, I'm a lead scientist at Cabot Corporation, which is in Billerica, Massachusetts. This is our global research headquarters. We're a medium-sized chemical company, and we focus on carbon black. Carbon black is a nanoparticle, which has been used for about 100 years now. It makes everything that you see that's black, basically has carbon black in it. So tires, backpacks, fabrics, all kinds of things. The challenge in our industry right now is making it more sustainable because it's made from petroleum products. So my role at Cabot is researching products which are recycled, based on recycled carbon, or less greenhouse gas impact, that sort of thing. And lead scientist basically means that I can lead projects, so I can conceive, pitch, and execute projects for new products. My journey as a researcher started even before undergrad, but let's talk about undergrad. I was a chemical engineering major at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I was really distracted. I had a motorcycle. I was into creative writing, dance. I would ride down to Chicago, for the weekend, that sort of thing. My GPA wasn't great, 3.3 major GPA. But I was really interested in research, found it exciting. I wanted to kind of make a difference, try new things. So I was an undergraduate researcher. And thanks to that, I had good contacts with the professor who was my supervisor. And when I wanted to go to grad school, he said, GPA is not that great, but you're a good researcher here. Apply to Lehigh University. And he said, they'll let you in because they trust me there. And if I say you're a good researcher, they'll let you in. And that really helped me get in because what I didn't realize is you compete against the whole world when you go to grad school. 11 out of 13 students in my class were international students. So that made it a challenge to get in. But as a graduate researcher, focused on carbon nanotubes, so nanoparticles and processing nanoparticles in suspensions. And I did better than undergrad. I had straight A's, and I had 6 first author papers. So I started to mature by that point. But my advisor was also really excellent. Then I did 5 years of postdoc because I graduated in 2008. Economy was terrible. Couldn't find a job or academic or industrial or anything. So did 5 years of postdoc, but it really helped me grow as a researcher because I learned to read a lot of papers and identify important directions to focus on. And that was something I didn't learn as a PhD student because my advisor was great and he pointed me in the right direction. So I had no idea how to do that on my own. And through this whole thing, I kind of kept trying to find academic jobs, but that's also really competitive and difficult. But no worries. I eventually ended up at Michelin Tire Corporation, working on tire performance. So that was more tribology and material science than colloidal science, but that's okay. Eventually transitioned back to particles and colloids, ended up back at Cabot Corporation, doing the same thing that I was doing for my PhD dissertation. So it's a non-traditional pathway in the sense that I didn't end up in academia, but it's definitely a pretty common pathway for someone who is interested in research and just wants to find a place where they can make a difference and try to make new, better products.
Thank you. Yeah, I never would have thought about, PhDs working in tire industry. So it's really interesting to hear your story. Thank you. Okay, and Dr. Shergalis.
Sure, yeah. So my name's Andrea. I think Jane gave a pretty great introduction of my background, or at least what I'm doing. I'm a discovery scientist at AbbVie, which is a pharmaceutical company in Chicago. I've been here for 5 years now. I joined directly after grad school, completing my PhD. I'm on the technology and therapeutics platform team, which is a team that's basically responsible for internalizing any kind of new innovative technology into the company. So very early stage, kind of in the pipeline in terms of drug discovery. My day-to-day is more like doing preclinical kind of biology experiments for potential drug candidates, things like if you've heard of like CRISPR screens and things like that, and then traditional kind of wet lab, biology bench work. How I got here in undergrad, I went to University of Akron in Ohio, so a little bit of a Michelin competitor. They have Goodyear over there, a tire company. But I wasn't in polymer science. I was a chemistry major, and I was kind of contemplating going into med school, versus research. I knew I really liked science in general, so trying to identify kind of a path forward from there. I had so I guess the first kind of decision point, I think, going into research instead of med school was just this idea of, when you're a doctor, you have specific drugs that you give to patients, and that's kind of it. I wanted to be kind of, on that front line of trying to find new medicines for patients who didn't have, treatment options. And I thought that would be, a really exciting, engaging kind of field of work to be in. Now I know, you can be an MD and still do all of that, innovative research and things like that. But at the time, I was, I didn't really have that kind of knowledge. So picked research kind of as a path, and thought I would just do a master's and like that would be it. That was the ceiling. I did do a research experience for undergrads, and then with the Leadership Alliance, kind of went to their symposium and learned more, about how PhD level research, especially in industry, kind of opens you up to more roles in a company than a master's would. So you are exposed, you're still doing a lot of research, but then you can, take that and kind of move around the company. And then again, talking about transferable skills, I think it's a little bit easier to move into different, fields or kind of aspects of a company, not just doing science, research, things like that, with a PhD than with just a master's or some technical degree like that. So I ended up applying for PhDs, ended up getting into the University of Michigan in a medicinal chemistry program. So that was pretty kind of like drug discovery specific. The research that I was doing was target-based drug discovery, kind of going through the motions of how that process worked. So I think that was kind of what helped me get the role here. It was the field was a little bit different than the work that I did in grad school, but the skill set, like the actual technical skills that I learned in grad school, I was able to apply to my role here. I think, as an undergrad, I think my main challenge was just that knowledge, just kind of understanding what's out there and getting exposure to different things. I didn't really know, which graduate programs to apply for, which ones were good, which ones were competitive, things like that. And then again, just like job, PhD level roles that you could apply for, or, even just how you can apply your PhD to other roles. So yeah, definitely like going to events like this and talking to people, things like that helps a lot to kind of get exposure to that and learn about that.
Thank you. So as you can see or hear, each of us has, myself included, although you haven't heard my story yet, has a different pathway into our current positions. No one pathway looks the same. We're all unique in how we got to where we are. So here's a question submitted by a student, and kind of along the lines of transferable skills, but how did your undergraduate research experiences help you now in succeeding in your non-academic careers? Like, what did you take from those research experiences as a student that you still use today? And I'll open it up to whomever wants to answer that question.
I can start because I'm probably farthest away from research right now. But I think just research or doing research just gives you certain level of grit and ability to fail and keep trying. So research gives you some soft skills that you may not otherwise get. And at Microsoft, we talk about having a growth mindset, and many people don't necessarily understand what that means, or they have different definitions. Our definition is try, fail hard, fail fast, and keep going. And when you're in research, that's what you do constantly. You are very you're very used to going into the unknown and the abstract. That's what research is. You don't know the answer to the question before you start. So you have to do some research, or you're dabbling into things that we don't know the answers. And that's what, to me, has been most helpful. Is most of my colleagues are very used to knowing the answers and being the smartest people in the room. Whereas as a researcher, I'm used to asking questions, and it's really helpful to ask a lot of questions, be able to thrive in the unknown and the abstract and those types of things. So it's the softer skills of research that have been really beneficial to me, and being able to fail, being able to thrive in abstract environments.
Yeah, I would second that. I think that's really important, that like willingness to learn. And then kind of following with that, I think, in the REU, you're put into an experience or, a research project that you don't have a lot of haven't had a lot of background in. So it's that process of learning it, like you said, learning it and then understanding it and then being able to communicate it, at the end with that, presentation or, at the culminating kind of experience. So learning and then also communication, I think you get from that too.
I would say I kind of learned what I didn't want to do from my undergraduate research experiences. I think that could also be as helpful. I'll be honest, when I left undergrad, I didn't think I'd ever do research again. But here I am just doing it kind of in a different field. And then, the scientific mindset is kind of the same in a lot of the critical thinking fields that Charisma and Andrea were talking about, apply across all the different sciences. So it's the mindset that you kind of build is applicable to research across a bunch of different fields, even if it's not the field that you studied in undergrad.
I guess I could really also highlight this willingness to say, kind of what Charisma said, willingness to say, I don't know. Just like approach something and say, and someone will ask you, well, how would you do that? We'll find out. I don't know yet. We'll get to it. And a lot of people have trouble with that. And I think it's given me a bit of an edge. One thing which it actually made maybe things a little bit more difficult for me, though, it trains you to ask questions. So I have to be careful when I go into a new environment with new engineers who are set in their ways, that I don't go like, why do you do that? Or are you sure? Like, what is it? You have to be careful about how you phrase things to emphasize that you still, yes, you're new, you understand, you trust people their way, but just why are you doing it like this? So you have to be careful that your training to ask questions doesn't get too aggressive.
You've all mentioned or alluded, the soft skills or the transferable skills, and we did get quite a few questions about that. So what does that mean? What are they? And can you give an example of one that you use in your everyday job?
Yeah, I think some of the soft skills, again, just emphasizing the willingness to learn new things, because I'll see people who just don't want to, they're just set on a path and they say, this is my role. I only do X, Y, Z. So, I'm not going to learn anything new. And sometimes it pays to, branch out and kind of expand, your experience, your expertise that can help you, even when, transferring to different roles. Like if you find that you're in a position that maybe you don't enjoy, just being open and willing to new open to new experiences, and then also collaborating with others. So I guess talk about in grad school, at least like in a medicinal chemistry, like a drug discovery program, you're working with a lot of different teams. So that ability to function with those different teams and communicate with them and kind of get people excited, get people engaged, help people understand the vision of a project is a really helpful skill to have.
What about like people skills?
Yeah.
Anything in the PhD training help with that?
Communication. People skills definitely, but learning how to communicate very, very complex concepts to any audience is something that you, if you haven't learned it yet as a researcher, it's something that you need to work on. Be able to take these really, really complex concepts and be able to teach it to my 8-year-old. Those are the types of things that you want to just really, people always talk about communication being a very important skill, but it's not cliche. It is very, very important to be able to communicate both written and oral in a very plain English way, like just or a plain whatever language, but make sure that you're able to break down those all of the and communicate your ideas and those concepts to anybody. And that's something that I think is very important, in addition to all the soft skills we talked about, like learning and collaboration and those things as well.
Any other transferable skills we can think of?
I guess I could think of a couple. I learned to ask people for help. So, for career-wise, to come to my advisor and say, I'm really nervous about getting into grad school. Can you help me? Or even just with experiments. My father's a chemist, and I was working on kind of a chemistry-related project. It's, usually you don't want to ask your parents for help, but I was like, okay, Dad, well, I'm having this issue. Do you have any ideas? And he said, okay, well, why don't you try this other chemical, which I tried, and lo and behold, it was better. So it really helped me kind of take a step back and ask questions. Or in other cases, research, just search for something else online or go do some reading. So just not assume that the way is best and that you're doing it as best, and just reach out and get some help.
You just reminded me of something, Constantine. When you talk about adaptability and flexibility, having the ability to pivot at any point, like as all of us may have experienced and I think Christopher talked about it earlier. When you're in graduate school, your dissertation may or may not be what you started off researching when you started. So you may have gone through so many different projects and so many different types of research while you're in graduate school before you end up with that final project, and it might still change. But if you being the transferable skill of being comfortable with the unknown, being comfortable with being able to be adaptable and flexible, and just again being able to operate in abstract environments is very, very, very helpful for you. For me, at least. I won't speak for others.
Right. So those skills that may not be directly, doing a PCR or doing work at the bench that you may learn as you're doing your PhD. There are other skills that can help you to be successful in all types of careers that aren't necessarily doing the research.
Yeah, skills that just are part of the process. I tell everybody to trust the process. It's about way more than the paper and the presentation. It's all the things that come along with it.
Here's another question from a student submitted before the session. So what drew you to your current career and to a non-academic career initially? And what keeps you coming back to work every day? Like what drives you? What motivates you in your current career?
Who wants to go first?
I have a quick answer.
Okay, go ahead.
I already said what drew me to the job. It was an accident. But what keeps me coming back, honestly, are the benefits. Like they're great, really great.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, the work that I do with folks every day, the people that I work with, the people probably are the most important part of my job, my customers, and as well as my colleagues. But the benefits are really great. So I don't want to lure you away from academia, but yeah, that's what helps. That's what I am motivated by at the moment.
Thank you.
I mean, I'll say what drew me to research is that I kind of wanted to try to affect the educational system at a higher level and through the scientific process. I chose this job over academia. I mean, I was a little maybe different than people here in that I was 36 when I graduated with my PhD. And so for me, trying to do the postdoc and then the tenure track and the low salary that kind of comes with that wasn't appealing for me at the time. So, and since RAND is kind of this quasi research quasi academic, or it's a research organization, but quasi academic organization, this kind of was a really nice way of being able to do academic work without what I see as some downsides of the academic track, which is kind of like a long runway before you're established and make a decent salary. And then also this like obsession with publishing in journals, which RAND appreciates, but does not obsess with in a different way. And I think I saw this Q&A here, but like, I'll be honest, there are days when I look at people with charisma in tech and that looks nice because it is also a slog, particularly now when a lot of research budgets are being cut. So those benefits are nothing to laugh at.
Starting salary would be comparable to though. So the starting salary. So don't think that you go out in industry and automatically earn a whole lot of money. My starting salary as an engineering professor would have been, I think, actually more than what I started with here at Microsoft. So it's not bad.
Interesting. Okay. So here's another question from a student, of course. What kinds of careers in industry, and this person's asking specifically about biotech and pharmaceuticals, are available to people with just an undergraduate degree? For example, if somebody wanted to take a year or two off to work and to gain more skills before applying to a PhD program, what kinds of positions are available?
There are some positions. So at AbbVie, there's like an associate scientist position. They take master students primarily. So I'm not totally sure. They might take bachelor's, but I think, kind of as time has gone on, they've taken less, undergraduate and more master's students. At least in the discovery space that I'm in, it would be, just those kind of like associate scientist positions where you're doing, some basic science work, you have kind of a single job, a single, kind of experiment or a single workflow that you'd be responsible, like a routine kind of assay. They're kind of available, all throughout the discovery department. So like, throughout the different, aspects of the scientific part of the company. They're there. There's obviously not as many as like a PhD level scientist, and I can't speak to non-science positions. I'm not sure about those. But yeah, at least in terms of scientists, I think they're there. But like I said, master's is mostly the level that they take for that associate scientist position.
Over here in the chemical industry, it's a little bit similar, maybe a little bit more freedom for a college grad. We have associate scientists who, especially if they have a couple co-ops or internships, are welcome, and they get associate scientist positions. The difference with the PhD level scientist is you do the things which you're told to do more so than being able to be creative and lead projects and just kind of find out your own things to do. If you're interested to do research, I do know associate science and bachelor's level people who have gone up and into research roles at Michelin. So if you go, the further you go from kind of mainstream, like mainstream sciencey things like pharma and biotech, the more chances you have to kind of unfold your wings as a college grad in a corporation.
I actually did do that. I didn't go directly from undergrad to graduate school, but it was highly motivating for me to go to graduate school after that experience. Between undergrad and grad, I was what they spoke about. I was a associate scientist at or associate researcher at Emory University in their neuroscience and neuroimaging lab in their medical school, and as was mentioned, I did the same research. As Andrea mentioned, I did the same research as everyone else, but I was focused on one project. I was probably the low man on the totem pole, and so was told what to do, as Constantine said, and didn't have as much autonomy. And of course, my name went last, or in somewhere in the paper maybe. And then also the because of the level, the salary was not as it was a bit challenging to live on, and so it definitely was motivating for me to go ahead and go get my PhD. It made me not take any more time, but go direct, hurry up and get into graduate school as soon as possible after that. But currently there are post-baccalaureate programs, or at least they started to be more post-baccalaureate programs after I finished. So there are some programs that give you some room to kind of make that decision as well. So that if I could do it all over again, I would have done that.
It's pretty common, at least in the social sciences and kind of the social science research firms, to have RAs, we call them research assistants. They do a lot of the grunt work. So kind of like the nitty gritty of the things that need to get done to, get participants in a study, make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and that sort of thing. At RAND, they're termed for 3 years. So after 3 years, you're out, no matter how good you're doing. I think they do that because they know that you're kind of limited in your career trajectory without a more advanced degree. At the master's level, you're typically doing kind of more advanced analytical work, but you're not conceptualizing a project or trying to get a project funded. That type of stuff is usually at the PhD level.
I should probably add one thing. It's not all terrible. We're making it sound kind of you just get to be a grunt. I do know people who are happy doing this, and the people who are happy in these roles are people who really enjoy the process of it. Like someone who's in engineering mechanics, I know, who really loves welding, and so he gets to weld a lot of stuff, and he really enjoys that, and he loves being a machinery and to work on the lathe. And it's the associate scientists here who really enjoy just being able to do precise experiments, do it reproducibly, and then go home and forget about it all. Like there's no like going home and having to worry about these projects and thinking about it and having dreams about carbon nanotubes or whatever nonsense. Like you go home, you relax, you don't worry about any of that stuff. So there are some bonuses to doing that too.
Yeah, and for like an RA for us, I think it's just a time for you to explore if this is what you really want. Like, you know, you're out of college, you're trying to figure out what you want to do. Like the only way to really kind of understand it is to be in that environment, and this gives you kind of a structured way to do that. And you talk to people, you talk about their experiences, their careers, just like this, and it just gives you some more information to figure out the next step.
So do you think a PhD is necessary for a research career? Like I guess what does having a PhD help you with, or I don't want to say advantage, but you know, what benefit does it give you over a master's or bachelor's? Like we want people to get PhDs, of course, and what would the reason for that be?
So it depends on your goals. Obviously, you know, career goals, as Constantine mentioned, you know, if you just want to do that, you know, kind of basic, you know, bench work where you do a task, you know, routine task, you're really good at this task, you know, you do it and then you go home and, you know, you enjoy your night or something like that. That's kind of where a bachelor's or a master's, I think, would get you, at least in you know, the sciences or this med chem field. The PhD kind of, again, opens up your career opportunities a lot. So at least at AbbVie, and I think it might be similar at other companies, it's very hard to kind of progress in your career without a PhD. People will be at the same level for, you know, 20 years with a master's, and that's just kind of the way that the tracks are set up. With a PhD, you can move, you know, around in the company a lot quicker. Again, you know, your career ceiling is a lot higher. And then again, as was mentioned, you have a lot more autonomy and like creative freedom in how you know, design your projects, choose which projects you want to work on. You know, of course, you have a little bit less freedom than in academia. You know, you're bound to kind of what the company wants to do, but at least where I am in this discovery space, kind of very early drug discovery space, we do have a lot of creative freedom to kind of pursue different projects and design experiments and things like that. And I think I really enjoy that aspect of my job. So I'm happy I got a PhD.
It really depends on your field also, I should note.
Yep.
So in pharma and biotech, PhD is absolutely necessary for creative field. In chemical engineering, sort of industry, chemical industry, I would say it's 90% necessary. 90% of people who get to lead projects have PhDs in my industry. In other fields, it's 10% necessary. In robotics, my brother's in robotics. He has a master's degree. He does not need it. He has a pretty high role at Boston Dynamics. He gets to design software and do new things with those dog robots, and it's fantastic. And in that field, PhDs just seems superfluous. So it really depends on the field. So talk to the people in your field also.
I would agree. Some of the researchers, some of the roles at Microsoft that are in research don't require anything beyond a bachelor's. So, and actually, sometimes that's not even required. So it does vary by field. I mean, according to the field, but it could also determine what you can. But it still has some. You still have to have some research background to know the research and scientific processes and stuff like that. So research is still helpful in making sure that if you want a role in industry research, knowing how to do it is necessary.
And one of the questions that came in was asking about freedom in your position compared to, you know, academics and university. Like, do you feel like you have more freedom compared to what you would have had, say, as a professor?
No. I will say, as a university professor, you do have and this is me speculating based on what I would have done as a professor, and what I saw while I was in graduate school. In in um, in industry, at least for me, you're very beholden to the company direction and the companies and the shareholders, depending on if you're a publicly traded company. And so what is important to the market, what is important to the shareholders, what is important to the company in that direction, then your success depends on how well you meet those criteria and those things that the company is looking for. Whereas with within an academic environment, particularly in a school, you you are beholden to the funding sources. But there's so many different types of funding sources that you can find somebody to pay for what you want, what you're interested in. And so I I would think that it's more, you have a lot more flexibility and freedom in I'll repeat the word autonomy in the academic environment than in in industry.
I would agree with that. Well, I kind of mentioned about freedom a little bit, but I will say I think this department that I'm in at AbbVie has a lot or a little bit maybe more freedom than other departments because we are in that early preclinical space. Again, we're doing basic science on proteins and things that no one really understands or knows about. So we do have a little bit of freedom to kind of explore and answer basic research questions like you would in academia. So I think, at least in this role, it is very similar, which I think is kind of atypical. I think, that's not very common, but just to say that it does exist, that you can have maybe some teams in industry that are a little bit more geared towards that academic kind of mindset.
Yeah, and for the kind of research firms in the social sciences, Rand is particularly freedom heavy. So a little bit like academia, you're kind of constrained by, you have to get something funded. It's a little bit more intense in research firms because we are soft money, we're not hard money. So we have to get in projects to charge our time to, and things like that. Rand gives you a lot of freedom coming out of grad school to start pursuing your own interests and funding sources. Others take a more regimented approach where you get that freedom as you get more and more senior. But I would say the main difference between a research firm and grad a university is that you don't it's all soft money mostly. So you have to bring in projects, and that means that sometimes you bring in projects and do projects that are somebody wants and are not necessarily the most interesting to your interests, but they kind of keep the lights on while you pursue other like research projects that you're really passionate about.
I think that's pretty key. There's a range of projects. There are projects which are very much bread and butter for your company, and you want to definitely make sure you do those and help the company make money. But then if I have some idea and I say, hey, this could be interesting, and my manager's usually like, sure, let's figure out how we can work it in. It will also depend on if you're on the R side or the D side, like Andrea was saying. Like if you're on the D side development, you're very much constrained by what researchers came up with and what needs to get to market. And you just handed projects and you take them to market. But if you're on the research side, it's an upstream, so by its nature, it has more freedom. Also, pay attention to the particular culture of the company that you're wanting to get a position with. At Michelin, we were a subsidiary, right? So North American subsidiary of a French company, not the research headquarters. So we had less freedom because most projects were conceived in France. But at Cabot, I'm at the corporate headquarters. So it's a different situation here. We're the ones responsible for really starting up new research projects.
I don't want to make it seem like you have no freedom in industry or in hardcore in industry. We do have freedom, but what you're being measured by or your what your success is dependent upon the goals of the company. They highly encourage actually you to go try new things and test things out and play around and see what works, and fail and see what happens. But they want you to do that on your own time. On your own time, and at the end of the day, you're measured by how you meet this metric that supports the business goals.
So we have about 8 minutes left, and there are several questions that came in about advice. So I guess number one, what advice would you give to students who are still exploring whether research is the right path for them? And what advice would you give to an undergraduate who is thinking about a non-academic career, but also wants to get a PhD?
I mean, for thinking about it, I just say do it and try it, right? Like that's how I realized that bench science wasn't for me. Before I went for my PhD, I did do a summer, when I was teaching, I had the summers off. And so I spent the summer interning for American Institutes for Research, which is like a competitor or frenemy, as we like to say it. And they do a lot of great work there. And so they needed somebody to help do lit reviews for some education projects. So I was like, I can do lit reviews. And so I kind of did that and used that as an opportunity to talk to people, which kind of helped solidified my interest in going to grad school. So I think there's no substitute for trying it in these different forms.
People ask me why, initially when I went to pursue a PhD, I was not interested in being a professor. And then, in undergrad, until they, molded me into, like I said, there was a program to make you go be PhDs. Until I bought into it. But everybody would ask, well, why do you want to get a PhD? And I said, because I can. And so I felt like I had the ability to get a PhD, so I got it. And it was more so for me to have the ability to get a PhD and be able to, it gives me choices. It gives me a lot more choices in what I want to do. It gives me more choices. It gives me more possibilities and flexibility in what direction I want to go to next. So the world is my oyster at this point because I have a PhD. I can go in any possible direction that I want to go into. And Christopher said something earlier today. Sometimes just trying it out will help you figure out what you don't want to do, which is just as important. I promise you, finding out what you don't want to do is sometimes way more important than finding out what you do want to do. I did some research at MIT Lincoln Labs in one of those summers, and I didn't want to do that. I can't remember. I did ballistic missile defense there, and I was like, yeah, I'm not interested in this at all. Like, no, I don't want to do that. And so there were a couple of, I think most of my summer research, except for 1 year, I did summer research 4 years, and out of those 4 years, only 1 year I actually enjoyed the research that I did. It was great, the great experiences, but I only enjoyed the research for one of those years.
Yeah, so I'll say, obviously it depends on the field that you're in or that you're interested in that you want to go into. If you want to do drug discovery or, any kind of research like that, I would say definitely get a PhD. But I will say it is very difficult. It's challenging. You're going to go through all of those kind of, trials and obstacles, learning those soft skills that we talked about, the resilience, communication, just learning a lot of new things, really complicated like topics and things like that. But, you'll come out the other end with a lot of those skills and, be able to apply them to a lot of different areas of careers and fields and things like that. There have been people when I was in grad school, who would master out, who, they came in, they realized, oh, I don't like this. They got a master's and then they moved on to something else like scientific outreach or just science communication, like science writing, things like that. So you can always just try it and then, leave if it's not for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, trying things is really important. I understand that people might have difficulty trying because how do you try being a PhD student? Well, I guess you can. You can always bail out with a master's. That's something that people should understand. You apply, don't apply for a master's. Then you just pay money. Apply
Right.
for a PhD, get into the PhD program. If you hate it, bail with a master's after 2 years. So that's the way to try it mechanistically. But you can also think of what you like right now. If you just like doing lab work and you're like, hey, maybe I should get a PhD, you might be disappointed because there's a lot of writing, a lot of reading, a lot of presentations, and that sort of thing. If you like lab work and you're at least okay with writing reports and doing presentations, and if you do write a nice report and you're like, this is a nice report, everything's clear, I enjoyed this, I enjoy the product, then you belong in a PhD program.
Absolutely, Constantine.
Great. Well, you've given us a lot of food for thought, and there are pluses and minuses about both academic and non-academic careers. So we have about 2 minutes left, and so I wanted to ask our guests, if there are any resources that you know of that might be helpful in career planning. I know one. The Science Careers has some online tools as well as Imagine PhD. And if you can't think of anything right now, that's okay. Maybe you can send them to me later. And also, if you're willing to answer so many student questions that came in, I can share your contact details with the students that we have in the program. So with that, if there's any parting words, I want to give you the floor.
So I would just say, feel free to reach out. Jane has my contact info or through LinkedIn if you have any questions. I think informational interviews are always helpful, chatting with people in the field that you're interested in. So definitely reach out if you have more questions.
Likewise for me, if one takeaway is don't be afraid to ask people you barely know for favors and career advice. Just if you met a professor once, you had a professor for a class, they're in the field that you're interested in, ask them.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your time and insight. And with that, we'll wrap up for today. And please tune in next week on Monday. We have another conversation with the doctoral scholar. And next Wednesday, we'll have a workshop on professional networking and communication. So please join us live for those sessions. All right. Have a good evening, everybody. Bye.